Morning all, welcome to Ecology Lesson 2. Um, Thank you for all your great work from the first lesson. Lovely food webs, great artwork, very impressive. And I think in terms of introducing new learning, I asked some people for comments, I think most of you said you preferred it with the voiceover trying to explain what to do. So just to recap where we're starting the first of the three Biology 2 units, ecology, and from the first lesson, what I did say was you want to start your glossary, just like we've done in biology, chemistry and physics before. Having that glossary with the key terms all in one place will be absolutely invaluable when you come to revision. So those were the words: habitat, ecosystem, interdependence, consumer, producer, community and population. Hopefully all of those are in a glossary, and when you meet them again you'll become more and more familiar with them and be able to use them. So in recapping, if you need to pause now and do your glossary, brilliant. If you need to add to the glossary you've already started, I noticed on Richard's you've got 4 words in your glossary. If you don't need the other words, that's fine, but I know it's been a really useful tool we've used. So the habitat here, oh that's not the right colour pen, I'll use red instead, and I'll use a highlighter, that's red. So if we're looking at the word habitat, that is the actual physical place where an organism will live. An ecosystem, hopefully you all got from the first lesson, an ecosystem is the living things and their environment. So the ecosystem is all of the living things. So in this picture on this screen, in that ecosystem you can see the rocks and the coral, the water, the quality of the water, the amount of oxygen in the water, the temperature, all of these things are part of the ecosystem. Interdependence is referring to when you did your food webs. Different species of different organisms here will rely upon each other. So without the producers, there's no food to start a food web. And here we have producer down here. So I'll just put interdependence here. That's how the organisms interdepend on each other. The producers use photosynthesis, and they are usually the plants or microscopic plants, algae, etc. They produce the food for the rest of the food chain. For example, in this diagram, these little fishies here need something to eat. So they're probably eating small bits of plankton, small bits of plant that are in the water or on the rocks or on the coral. They depend upon them. However, the waste from the fishes is also used by the plants as a nutrient. So actually the plants and the fish interdepend on each other. Referring back to the food webs again, the producer was the plant doing photosynthesis at the start, and then after that you can have several layers of consumers. So the primary consumers were eating and feeding off the producers, and then the secondary consumers were feeding off the primary consumers. All the different living creatures in one place together form a community. And when we talk about population, population is the number of a species. So if we're monitoring an environment, an ecosystem, we might, for example, look at the number of squirrels in a woodland. And if the number of squirrels is falling, we might look at the reasons why. And a lot of you will have seen things on telly about the monitoring of animals, and we know that there's only certain numbers left and some species are close to extinction, or we get protected species because the numbers have gone down. And a lot of that we'll come on to later in this topic has got to do with the effect of human beings, and we're taking up a lot of the environment, we're destroying natural resources, and therefore the populations of some creatures have got critically low. We can also measure the population and see if we've done some work and some environmental work, has the population improved? So like I say, pause now, make sure your glossary is in your own words, and it includes all the words that you might need to use. Okay, welcome back after your pause. You've done a food web. Some of you neater than others, I will admit. Here is Bethany's food web. Absolutely great drawings. My daughter was very jealous when she saw this, and she's decided to try and improve some of the work she's doing at home herself for her school. What food webs allow us to do is to start looking at the impact of that interdependence. So for example, on here, what would happen if all of these insects, these little grasshoppers here, what would happen if there was a disease that wiped out and killed off all of the grasshoppers? So you might look at it from the point of view of, well, here with the grass, there's less animals eating the grass, so maybe the grass grows more. So that's good for the grass and the population of grass and grass as an organism. However, what happens to the number of frogs? Frogs on this food web eat grasshoppers. There's nothing else on there that frogs eat. So if the grasshoppers have gone, what then happens? Well, according to this food web, we can sort of make a prediction. If we wipe out all the grasshoppers by using insecticides, for example, then we're also actually wiping out the frogs. And then if the frogs are gone, the problem then is, what happens to the number of foxes? What happens to the number of hawks? Because they've got less food to eat. So usually what you find is these secondary and tertiary consumers will eat several different things. So for example, the hawk here is eating frogs, it's eating voles, and it's eating thrushes. So the hawk still has some food. It can still eat voles and thrushes, but what it hasn't got is the frogs. So maybe if we do wipe out the number of grasshoppers, it kills off the frogs, and also the number of hawks goes down because they haven't got as many foods as before. Or because the hawk hasn't got any frogs to eat, the hawk is now eating too many thrushes and too many voles, and therefore their populations go right down. So hopefully what you'll be able to do is look at your food web and be able to make some connections between what would happen if the number of an animal increased or decreased. So just to practice this, what I'd like you to do is, on the screen here now, I'd like you to try and predict what will happen. So I'm going to get you to pause for a couple of minutes, read those questions, and then on this first one, what would happen if the number of herons died out? So just to help you with this, up here we have the number of herons. If all of those herons died out, if all of the herons were gone, for question number 1, what would happen? And you might say to yourself, there's nothing eating the common frog, so now the number of frogs goes up. Or you might say, there's nothing eating the sticklebacks now, or there's only one thing eating the sticklebacks, so the number of sticklebacks goes up. Either one of those two things is possible. So can you pause now, please, and can you write down the answers to those 4 questions in your books? Okay, hopefully you've done that. You've had a go at them. You've put an answer for each one. And now, obviously, we'll try and use our green pens. I just need to work out how to do something on here quickly. I think I've done it now. So what would happen if the number of herons died out? Well, the number of frogs and sticklebacks would increase and therefore cause a decrease in the prey organisms. Okay. What would happen if there was a sudden increase in the mayfly larva population? There's lots of answers that are going to be correct, but if there was a sudden increase in mayfly, then that means the pondweed, the microscopic plants, would decrease because they'd be overeaten, and then all the predators of those mayfly larvae, the ones who are eating them, those populations would increase because there's more food for them to have. The only thing you might want to do now, just looking at that, is we haven't talked about prey and predator. A consumer that is eaten by another consumer is the prey, whereas a predator is a consumer that eats another consumer. So we have predators eating prey. Most basic example, foxes are predators, rabbits are prey. The fox eats the rabbit. Okay, on to the next question. What would happen if the population of frogs increased? Well, with more frogs, they would be eating more dragonfly, more mayfly larvae and sticklebacks. However, for the herons might go up because they've got more frogs to eat. And then number 4, the last one, what would happen if the pondweed and microscopic plants all died out? And the answer is everything else in the ecosystem would die off. There'd be no food at the start, so the primary consumers would die, then the secondary and everything else. So you'd actually wipe out all life on that ecosystem, not on the planet, because that would be a bit silly. Right. Your task. I was really impressed with what you did with research and going and finding a food web of your own and drawing it up. What I'd like you to do, there's not that much on the screen, but what I'd like you to do is choose one of these environments at the bottom. So these different ecosystems, you could have a desert ecosystem, you could have, just turning the highlighter on for a second because I'm not very good at this yet. So there's a desert ecosystem, there's a rainforest ecosystem, a coral reef like some of the images I've been using, the African savanna, the plainlands. You could use the polar region, so the North Pole, South Pole, or you could find an ecosystem of your own, something like the New Forest, a local one, Fox's Forest, South Sea seafront, the seashore. So there's loads of different ecosystems. And what I'd like you to do is just a little bit of a fact file. Now I'm only expecting this to take about 15 minutes. So finding an ecosystem, a quick drawing of a simple food web for it. So make sure it's got there. So do it on Google or wherever you go to get your research. So a simple food web for an ecosystem and then some facts about it. So for that ecosystem, what it says on here, what animals live there in that community. Then the bits to add on, the few simple facts. So, and you might need to replay this bit several times. What are the conditions like there? As in, what are the normal temperatures? Do they have lots of different seasons? So for example, if you think about our seasons, we have quite a cold winter and quite a warm summer. That will affect the creatures that live there, etc. And what times of year they have lots of food available. Some animals move abroad or migrate to other places during the coldest weather to avoid that. Some come here in the summer, like swallows and different birds. So for the ecosystem you're choosing for this environment, whichever one you choose, what's the weather like? Is there high rainfall? Is there, for the desert, for example, there'll be hardly any rainfall, whereas the rainforest, you're looking at regular rainfall, especially during the rainy season. Find maybe 5 or 6 simple facts about it to do with the weather, the conditions, the seasons, the amount of daylight, the different predators, the different prey. If you are looking for those really high grades, which a lot of you are, look at the targets you set yourself. The only other thing I'd suggest you might want to do is have a think about, have we humans, have we affected that environment? So do any of our activities? So for example, looking at this one here, if you were choosing a coral reef environment and you chose the Great Barrier Reef off Australia, that is massively affected by what we do, by the quality of the water, by pollution, by etc., what we put into the water. So it might be looking at, like I say, for the grades 7, 8 and 9, have a think about and try and do some simple facts. How have we affected that environment? Okay, good luck, thank you, and I look forward to getting your photos of your work so I can grade it as soon as you've got it done and just pop it on and show my homework. Excellent, thank you very much.